And we're going to be continuing on our series this morning called God Shows Up. And this morning we're going to be looking at the topic of being overwhelmed. Now, let me ask you, all of you, whether you're here or online, and that's how we'll be doing it. I'll try to stop saying that because it's got to get old. Anyway, so I'm going to ask you all a question this morning, and that is, when was the last time you felt overwhelmed? Now, I thought about that question to ask you before my trip up here this morning. So the last time I felt overwhelmed was really, really recently, because when I left Osceola, my driveway was barely white with snow. And by the time I got up here, it's only, 35 miles. Whiteout conditions, my little Volvo plowing through the 5 or whatever inches of snow we've got out there. But I made it. But I had white knuckles probably for the 5 minutes after I got here, even just wondering, thinking, well, if I go in the ditch, at least I won't have to go to church, but that won't be good. But there's other ways where we feel overwhelmed. And what we're going to be looking at this morning is the fact that what I want us to realize, each of us in whatever situation in life, is the fact that God shows up during those times. He shows up during that time of being overwhelmed. And as we go on to this series, one of the things we've been doing is our tagline, our tag phrase, whatever, that we've been using throughout this series so far, is that God shows up when we least expect it, in ways we don't expect, and sometimes in ways we wish, or rather He didn't. And the part of that, the last part of that especially, we need to realize He is a sovereign God. And He promises us throughout the Bible that He will love us, He will always be with us, He'll forgive us, He ordains everything we go through. And sometimes I'm like you. I don't understand why He thought I had enough strength to get through the challenge that He's given me. But He does. But when that happens, we tend to get overwhelmed. And this morning we're going to be looking at a passage of Scripture that talks just about that very thing. And that is the idea of being overwhelmed. I'm going to be reading from Psalm chapter 3. I'm going to be reading actually the whole psalm. I'm reading it from the New Living Translation. So for those of you here, you may want to look at the screens, or if you're watching online, looking at the screens, or using your device and reading it from whatever version, because the message is the same, even though the wording may be a little bit different. Psalm chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. O Lord, I have so many enemies. So many are against me. So many are saying, God will never rescue him. But you, O Lord, you are a shield around me, and you are my glory, the one who holds my head high. I cried out to the Lord, and He answered me from His holy mountain. I lay down and slept, yet I woke in safety, for the Lord was watching over me. I am not afraid of 10,000 enemies who surround me on every side. Arise, O Lord, rescue me, my God. Slap all my enemies in the face. I particularly like that phrase. Have you ever thought about that? You all know people that you'd like to slap in the face sometimes, right? Wouldn't it be nice if God did it for you? I mean, think about it. He's got a lot better. I just saw an elbow nudge here that you guys didn't see online. God's got a lot harder slap than any of us do. So, David is saying, slap him. Then he says, shatter the teeth of the wicked. Another thing that I kind of like to see sometimes. Victory comes from you, O Lord. May you bless your people. Now, when we think about being overwhelmed, maybe sometimes you feel like the guy in the slide there. You're underwater. All you got left is one little hand up going, help me. Maybe it's sometimes it can be distance that overwhelms us, especially for those that are in college, in that first year of college. Any of you that remember that know that was for some of us, a very difficult time, because mom and dad had always been there. Mom and dad had always been there to remind you to actually do your schoolwork, and now you were in college. You could do schoolwork or not. If you didn't want to, you didn't do it. And your grade showed it. But it didn't matter, because you were a long ways away. And believe me, for those of you that are in college, your parents are also having a struggle, because they know what you're like. and they know what they needed to do all through grade school and high school to get you through. And now you're on your own. And we get a little bit nervous by that. Sometimes distance overwhelms us because, especially for those that are in the armed forces, single moms or single dads, and they're not single because they're married, they're happily married, but that other partner is maybe thousands of miles away for months on end, and all of a sudden they go from being a happily married couple with a nice family to being a happily married single family because dad or mom isn't around, and how do you deal with that? Or sometimes it's just, there may be some people like this today where, they got to get out of the driveway. They can't get out of the driveway, and their husband's away on business, and he's the only one that knows how to run the snowblower, and how are they going to do this? And you get overwhelmed by distance. Sometimes it's health issues, especially nowadays, right? With the whole COVID thing, and do you wear a mask or don't you wear a mask? And you go online, which is really dangerous, and you can read 75 articles that say masks are worthless. They cause more problems than they help. Don't wear a mask. And you can find 75 other ones that say, if you don't wear a mask, you are going to die, and everybody around you is going to die. You've got to wear a mask. And now they're saying, wear multiple masks, Trish told me about, it was a joke, but she told me about at the medical center one time, the person that's in charge of making sure everybody follows COVID rules said that they not only need to double mask, they need to triple mask now. And so as a joke, she went into the office. She had a mask on here. She had a mask across her head, her eyes, and she had one coming down the top of her head. And she went in and said, here, how's this? Will that work? Didn't go over well. But I thought it was funny. That's me. But health is such an issue right now. And let me tell you my personal feeling on that, and I've shared this with you before. The worst thing that could possibly happen to any of us right now, according to the news media, is getting COVID. That disease that 95 to 99% of the people recover from. That's the most dangerous thing we're dealing with right now. But let me tell you what, that for me, maybe the worst thing is getting COVID and dying from COVID, but you know what else is the best thing in life? Dying from COVID. Because then I get to go see Jesus before the rest of you. I'm not afraid of that. But some people are so overwhelmed by the fear of this disease or the fear of other diseases, of cancer. I read an article once about, and I think it was a correct one, about a woman that was so nervous, this was years ago, so nervous about getting cancer that she did everything she could possibly do not to get cancer, and she died of cancer. But the doctor said part of the reason for the cancer was the amount of stress that she put on herself because she was afraid she might die of cancer. She was overwhelmed by that fear. Sometimes we're overwhelmed by our own decisions, like debt. Most of the time people are in debt, not always. Most of the time people are in debt because they want those toys now. And all you got to do is make the minimum payment on that credit card, and you can have all the toys you want. It's a piece of cake. Except for the fact that if you make the minimum payment on that credit card, you will never get out of debt. So maybe it's decisions like that you made. Maybe it's decisions you made in relationships. The divorce rate is so high right now, and I hear over and over again people saying, I don't know what I was thinking. We went out to a bar together one night, and we decided we liked each other, and a couple weeks later we were married, and I've been miserable ever since. But it's a decision I regret ever since then. Decisions can really help make us feel overwhelmed. But I think my personal feeling is one of the biggest things that can overwhelm us is family struggles. Family struggles. Because if you think about it, if a family is getting along, if you're together as a family, whether it be the husband, the wife, the kids, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, on down the list, if you've got that support group, it seems like you can get through most anything, right? Because no matter what, your mom and dad are going to be there for you. No matter what, your brothers and or sisters are going to be there for you. You've got that nucleus. But when that nucleus breaks away, then all of a sudden you're on your own. You feel abandoned, and you need to know how you're going to get through it all, and you can feel overwhelmed. And I think, even though all of these other ones that I've given you are very valid, I think the family issue is maybe the hardest to get through. That idea of how can we get through all of that. The passage that I read you this morning kind of talks about that, because if we look at the history of Psalm chapter 3, it was written by David during one of the most stressful times in his life because his son, one of his favorite sons, had turned against him. And so back up, I'll tell you the story about it. I'm going to give you the Mike Fisk version of it. If you want to read the actual facts about it, you can read it in 2 Samuel verses 13 through 15. But David had many wives, and he had many sons and daughters. And so if we call this person a son of David and this person a son of David, but they may not have the same mothers, so they may be just, half brothers, half sisters, that kind of thing. One day, one of David's brothers looked upon one of his sisters, it would have been like his stepsister, half sister, whatever, and he thought she was looking pretty good. In fact, he thought she was looking so good that he wanted her, and that doesn't mean he just wanted to have friendship. He wanted to have sex with her. And so he developed a plan whereby he could get Tamar, the woman, to come in to tend to him because he was sick and he needed food in his room. And so he arranged to have somebody tell her that he needed food, and she came out of the goodness of her heart to bring this poor half-brother of hers something to eat. And when she came in, he sprang out of bed and raped her. Rape wasn't any more of a good thing back then than it is now. So anybody that's been involved in any kind of sexual abuse knows the trauma that must have inflicted on this poor young woman. And then after he got done raping her, then he decided he didn't like her so well after all, so he tossed her out and went on with life. Well, one of his brothers, his name was Absalom, and Absalom was one of David's favorite sons. And for any of you that have multiple siblings and you don't think your parents play favorites, we try not to. We really do. But it happens. And Absalom was one of David's favorites. Absalom was so angry about the rape of his sister, because Absalom and Tamar were true brother and sister, that he devised a plan to kill his half-brother. And it worked flawlessly. He ended up murdering his half-brother. And if you look in 2 Samuel, it says David heard about it and he was sad. Didn't do anything. He was just sad. He heard about Tamar's rape, he was sad. He heard about the murder of one of his sons and he was angry. But he never confronted Absalom. He never talked about the situation with anybody. He just kind of kept it to himself of, boy, that's really a bummer she got raped, and now I really feel bad that he got murdered. But he never did anything. Absalom, a lot of times, and those of you that are parents know this, when a kid does something major like that, or hopefully nothing that major, but when a kid does something, a lot of times they do what they do just for attention. Just for attention, just to see if they can get mom and dad to pay attention to them. Maybe they feel like mom and dad are ignoring them, and so they do something to get mom and dad together to do something. In fact, that's one reason sometimes that women get pregnant out of wedlock and cause some crisis in the families, to get mom and dad to get together, because they think if I get pregnant, then mom and dad will both be mad at me, and at least they'll agree on something. And so sometimes kids do something just to get their attention. Oakley is famous for that, by the way. Oakley's my dog. I don't have a picture of him up today. Oakley is famous for that because he knows that one of my pet peeves, one of the things that ticks me off the most of anything, is he will go into the bathroom and take something out of the garbage. It could be an empty roll of toilet paper. It could be a Q-tip. It could be just about anything else. And we'll be out watching TV, and he'll come out and he'll take this, whatever it is, and lay it gently on the floor right in front of me. He's trying to get my attention, and he knows how to play the game. And our kids aren't any different than that. And that's what Absalom was doing, in a sense, as he was saying, Dad, will you pay attention to what's going on here? David refused to take action on it. Finally, Absalom one of David's advisors came to David and said, you've got to do something to resolve this issue. And so he got Absalom to come back to Jerusalem and to go into the presence of the king. And so he came back home, in a sense, went in to see David. They met, they talked, and Absalom left. And David didn't call for him. And if you need to remember, back in that time, if the king didn't call for you, it didn't matter who you were. You didn't go see him. And David ignored him. All he wanted was to hear something from Dad. And so Absalom decided another trick to try to get Dad's attention. He went to the gates of the city and he started talking to people, and people would come for David to hear their grievances, and Absalom would stop him and say, "Hey, what's going on?" "Well, this is going on, blah, 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 blah." And Absalom would say, "Oh, man, that's really tough. If I was king, I'd take care of you." Does that kind of sound familiar, by the way, in the political scene? I'll take care of you if you'll support me. I'll take care of anything. And pretty soon, Absalom had this undercurrent of support behind people, to the point where he had an entire army that he went off into the hills and formed this army to march down towards Jerusalem. And as he was marching down, David's advisors came to say, Absalom is coming down, he's got an army, he's going to take over and have this military coup, and you're going to be out. The other thing that they did back then is, if a king was defeated, the king that defeated that king would kill them. So David and his entire household were in danger of being completely wiped out by Absalom. So he fled. Eventually he gets people behind him, and the sad part, fast forwarding a little bit to the end of the story, is that eventually Absalom was killed in battle. And David says, "Oh, Absalom, I loved you. Why did all this happen?" Well, this isn't part of this particular lesson, but we could also probably say, well, maybe David, part of the reason that this all happened is because you didn't take the stand. But looking at David's side of it for a minute, I think David and Absalom were both overwhelmed. David was overwhelmed because he had a crisis in his family that he didn't know how to handle. It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that he went to God to say, "Okay, God, how should I handle that?" Because that would be showing that he was weak. And so David, like a lot of us, okay, this is something that God can't handle. This is something I've got to handle, and I don't know how to handle it. So you know what I'm going to do? Since I don't know how to handle it, I'm not going to do anything. Absalom, on the other hand, was looking for somebody that would listen. Somebody that would just pay attention to him. Both of them were overwhelmed by the situation that they have. That's why in Psalm chapter 3, verse 1, David says, "Oh Lord, how many are my foes? How many people rise up against me?" One of the things about things that tend to overwhelm us is that they snowball. Kind of like the cartoons you might remember seeing, where somebody would fall in the snow and start going down a hill, and pretty soon it's just a big snowball. They're not even visible. Sometimes if we don't handle our problems from the very beginning, they tend to snowball, and pretty soon we've got to take care of this because we didn't take care of that, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon not only are we overwhelmed, but we don't know what we can do, and we feel like we're attacked, and there's really three things that we can do. One is that we can fight, or two things we can do. One, we can fight, we can lash out, we can be angry. And a lot of times I think a lot of people that we know that are angry and lash out at us are lashing out because they're overwhelmed by whatever life is and they don't know how to handle it. Or the other thing to do is just run. Run, self-medicate yourself, try new relationships, try a new job. I've got this issue and I need to deal with it, and so we just keep right on going and going and going. And we can't find the satisfaction because we've never really dealt with the issues. David must have felt like that kind of when in the second verse of that chapter it says, "Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him." So not only did David have a lot of enemies, but he had a lot of people that are saying, "You're finished, David. God will never deliver you." Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Your own son has rejected you. Now your nation has rejected you. David felt completely overwhelmed. He felt like that guy in the picture that I showed earlier with his hand up above the water, not knowing what he could do. He said, I'm done. What can I do? But I'm going to jump ahead for a minute to verse 6, because this is what David says later on. Just a couple verses later, he says, but I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. In other words, what David is saying here is, you know what? I'm not afraid. I've got everybody against me, but I'm not afraid. I'll get through this because God is on my side. What was different? Well, I think what was different was between the verses that I skipped, and we're going to look back at those. The first thing is, I'm not overwhelmed because of what it says in verse 3 of chapter 3. He's my shield. But you, my Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. When we feel overwhelmed, we need to realize that God is our shield. The only things that can attack us, the only things that can get into our lives are the things that he allows into it. Now, when I thought about the word shield, I thought of this. Violet in The Incredibles, which we used to watch quite often at our house. And how she could save anybody because all she'd have to do is put up the force field and nothing could penetrate that. I think we need to realize, simple as that illustration is that God is our violet. Yes, he'll let some things through. He lets some stuff into our lives, but that's to help us to grow stronger. But we don't know, nor will we know till we get to heaven, how many things God has not allowed into our lives. We don't know how many times he has saved us, how many times he has reached out to us. He's our shield. And that's the one thing that David could realize, is that I'm not overwhelmed because I know that God is my shield. He's the one that keeps me safe. He's the one that I can count on. And too many times, I think we forget that. And when we have a problem coming, whatever the problem is, of those four major categories that I shared with you, we think God can't, that we're on our own on it, but God is there. The other thing is, I'm not overwhelmed because he hears me. Verse 4 says, I call out to the Lord and he answers me from his holy mountain. Now, what I want you to think about here is when it says he hears me, there's a difference between hearing somebody and really listening to what they say. Have you ever noticed that? We parents know that very, very well. Sometimes we spouses know that very, very well because we know that we're saying words and we know the words are getting in through the ear canal and into the brain. We're being heard, but we're not being listened to. You know what I mean by that? And what the psalmist is saying here is, I call to the Lord and he answers me. Well, that's because he actually hears us. You see, I can pray to God for something, and I can use all, the words that I have to do that. But what I don't always know how to do, and maybe you found this, is find those ways to express something that's really, really difficult. I don't even know how to pray, God. I was at a Bible study Friday morning. Every Friday morning, a couple of us guys get together. And one of the discussions that we've had the last couple of weeks in Bible study when we get ready to pray around the table is, how do you pray for our government? I know how I'd like to pray for our government. Don't get me wrong. I have some very strong opinions on that. But Jesus says to pray for those that persecute us, to pray for our enemies, to pray for those that just completely we disagree with, to pray for those that may even hate us. And I don't think when he says that we should pray that God strikes them with lightning or anything like that, because what God really wants, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal or gay or straight or mask wearer or a not mask wearer or a vaccination person or a not vaccination, he doesn't care about that. What he wants is for us to draw close to him through Jesus. So when I call out to the Lord, I know he hears me because he answers me from his holiness, from where he's at. Sometimes I don't like the answer. That goes back to our tagline, because sometimes he shows up in ways we don't want. But he always answers us. The other reason I'm not overwhelmed is because he strengthens me. David writes, he says, I lie down and sleep, I wake again because the Lord sustains me. Now think back a minute to what we've been talking about. What do you think David's mindset was during this time? He's on the run from his very own son. One of his daughters has been raped. The other one is one of his sons has been killed. God has given him all kinds of promises about having a throne that was going to last forever. But right now, his favorite son is in control and out to really undo everything that he had done. Put yourself in David's situation a little bit. Could you lay down and sleep? Yeah. I have a hard time sleeping if the girls are home late. And I don't mean late as in beyond their time they say they'd be there, but just late as in they said they would be home and they aren't. Stuff happens. You get waylaid. But I have a hard time sleeping during that. David says, in spite of all of this, in spite of the fact that I've got 10,000 people surrounding me on every side, in spite of the fact that I don't know what to do, in spite of the fact that I'm hated by everybody, in spite of the fact that people wish I were dead, I think I'll just go to bed and get a good night's sleep. Why can I do that? Because the Lord sustains me. You see, so many of our problems, maybe all of our problems, I kind of hesitate to say that because that's really, really all-inclusive, but so many of the things that we stress out about, that we lose sleep about, aren't in our control anyway. They're in God's control. And so I'm sustained, I'm strengthened because I'm not overwhelmed, because I know that all the things that I don't understand, all the things that I struggle through, I don't need to worry about because it's the Lord that sustains me. He's the one that will see me through. And the last thing I think David shows us here is that I'm not overwhelmed because he fights for me. Look what it says in verses 7 and 8. It says, arise, Lord, and deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies, hear it again. Strike my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. For from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessings be on your people. One of the things that us guys get accused of on occasion is that we are a fix-it type of person. Women have claimed that they will come home and just want to share about their day and about some of the frustrations. And allegedly, us guys will immediately try to fix it by coming up with some sort of a solution, even though all you ladies want to do is be able to vent. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Well, no, I do know it's true because I'm guilty of it. Any honest guy probably is too in a lot of cases. But it's not just guys. It's a mom thing, it's a woman thing, it's a human thing, is that sometimes we just want to fix things. Again, talking in Bible study the other morning, and one of the guys in the Bible study is a college professor at North Central University in education, and one of his jobs, is to go out and do the teaching education, but then also going out and supervising student teachers. And he shared with us on Friday morning. He said, my heart's broken. What's going on? He said, I've got this one student. He said, she started going to the U of M to be a neurosurgeon. But she just didn't feel like that was where she wanted to go. And somehow, he said, I'm not sure how, but she got hooked up with doing some volunteer work. And she realized she really loved teaching. And so she left the U to go to Northwest Central Bible College to get her degree in education. And her parents cut her off because she wasn't going to be a neurosurgeon. Because don't all of us want our kids to be doctors? I mean, face it. And he said, I was watching her because he said we had to do a Zoom thing, with her, watching her teach her kids on Zoom. And he said, I was just kind of watching how things go. He said, I was amazed at her. He said, first of all, he said, her face glowed. She was having so much fun. And she had such a gift, even over online, had such a gift of interacting these young kids, who was in elementary class, interacting with these young kids and getting them involved in this class. He said it was one of the best Zoom classes I think I've ever seen. And so he said afterwards, she and I had a Zoom meeting to do an evaluation on it. And he said, I could tell right away something was wrong. And he said, I told her what a great job she did and stuff, and I just asked her, I said, what's wrong? She said, I agree with you. She said, I had so much fun that day. I love what I do. I just love it. But she said, I went home and I was telling my mom and dad what went on because I was so excited about it. And they kicked me out of the house. They told me I needed to leave. Sometimes we need to have that deliverance that says you're okay. And that girl needed to be delivered from the stress of that. She felt so overwhelmed by that. But you see, it's God that delivers us. It's Him that will see us through all of those struggles. It's so easy for us to think we need to do it on our own. We get overwhelmed when we think we've got to control things and we can't. We get overwhelmed when we think that we are the ones that are in charge of our own destiny when we're not. So when you feel overwhelmed or abandoned, I want you to think of three things. Rather than blaming others, trust God. Rather than self-medicating, seek the comfort God can give us. And then look for reconciliation. Maybe it's not with other people. Maybe it's just with God. Remember the story of the prodigal son? He went off and did his own thing, and pretty soon he was so overwhelmed that he was eating pig food, and he thought, I can't do this anymore. It was the sense of overwhelming in the prodigal son that turned him back to God. He could have gone the other way, and a lot of people do. As we close this morning, rather than all of those other things that can overwhelm us, remember the fact that we serve a God that shields us. Yep, we'll go through stuff, but He shields us. The second thing is He hears me. He really, really listens. He knows what my struggle is. There's times in my prayer life where I just say, God, I can't express to you how I feel, but I thank you that through your Holy Spirit, you know exactly how I feel in words that I can't even express. And He fights for me. I don't need to fight anymore. Wouldn't it be nice if we could go through life realizing those battles aren't mine? They're all taken care of. And then He strengthens me during those times when I need that strength. As we close this morning, let me encourage you to realize that I found this online and I kind of half agree with it. It says, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. And I thought, that's cool, except I don't agree with it. I think if I could do it different, I would say, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's who you allow to carry it. See, God never intended for you to have that picture on you, because He wants to take the load. He wants to strengthen you. He wants to encourage you and listen to you. For those of us that are here, let's stand together as we close in prayer. For those of you that are watching online, if you have been moved at all by today's lesson, let me encourage you, ask of you that just in the comment line, if God's spoken to your heart, that you would just say thank you or say maybe a testimonial of something that God's done. If there's something personal that you would like to talk about, go ahead and message me on our Facebook page, and I'd be glad to get back to you as well. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I thank you for who you are. Father God, I thank you that in spite of all the struggles that we have, there's times when we feel completely overwhelmed in just about any area of our lives. I pray that you'd help us to remember, as David did, that you are the one that strengthens us, that you are the one that listens to us, that you're the one that shields us, that you're the one that fights for us. And I thank you for those things, and I pray these things in your name. Amen.